responsible for law enforcement, which often perpetuates the systemic issues, particularly for marginalized communities, right? People who are incarcerated frequently feel wronged by the state, fueling a sense of anger, resentment, and lack of reintegration. High recidivism rates are a direct consequence of this feeling of societal alienation. So this looks like, for example, a criminal feeling that he has been wronged by the state in the form that there exists a social contract violation. So, for example, a person from a poor background committing a crime thinks that he has been wronged by the state in the sense that there does not exist a financial stability for him that the state had a responsibility to create in the first place, and therefore there exists this sort of disparity wherein the state is not able to fulfill its responsibility towards a person, and this lack of responsibility fulfillment in the first place looks like, for example, poverty, looks like marginalized groups, and therefore this leads to higher offense rates from these groups, right? Secondly, there currently exists a model that emphasizes punishment over prevention, which does little to reduce the root cause of crimes. And thirdly, there exists systemic biases. Despite training efforts, police force are inherently biased, right? So minority groups, especially like black and Muslim communities, face disproportionate level of policing and criminalization. This is seen in examples such as harsher treatment of black suspects by predominantly white police forces, creating a cycle of mistrust between these communities and the state, right? So, in the absence of burden of the police force, we can create a more equitable, restorative system that focuses on the social justice and community well-being rather than punitive measures. A society that invests in the prevention of crime and focuses on rehabilitation rather than punishment fosters a move towards cohesive and harmonious community, right? Community. So, burdens on our side. Firstly, the current police system is ineffective and harmful. Secondly, to prove the necessity of our model, and thirdly, there exists lesser stakeholder conflict on our side of the house, right? So, our first argument of the principle of equality, then. So, the principle of equality demands that every individual is treated with dignity and fairness by the state and the legal system, irrespective of their race, class, background, etc. This principle requires a system that ensures, firstly, equal protection, equal opportunities, and equal justice for all citizens. Why is this important then? Equality is a fundamental human right, right? So, if underpins any social justice and ensures that people of all walks of life can trust the system that governs them. So, in the absence of this principle of equality, this looks like increased divisions and lesser cohesion within the society, which in turn leads to, for example, higher resentment towards the government and towards the legal systems, eroding the trust in the systems in the first place, right? So, which undermines the very existence of the systems on their side of the house, right? And now how do we uphold this principle in our model? Firstly, by moving away from police systems that disproportionately target marginalized communities and replacing it with a system that prioritizes restorative justice and community accountability. Secondly, our model promotes a community-driven solution where individuals are empowered to manage their own safety and hold each other accountable without relying on biased institutions, right? And thirdly, we focus on prevention and rehabilitation. We provide equal support to all citizens, addressing the root causes such as mental health issues, social inequalities, etc., right? Then how do they violate the principle? Firstly, there exists a current system wherein the principle wherein there exists a disproportionate policing and of marginalized communities. So this looks like, for example, police violence and racial profiling disproportionately affecting black people in the United States and other minority groups, which creates a discriminatory legal system that fails to offer equal protection to all citizens, right? And therefore, this leads to, for example, a long-drawn harm on their side of the house, in the sense that this creates a disparity within the majority and the minority, and creates a distrust in the legal system from the minority, right? And therefore, this minority is inherently motivated to hire crimes against the state. Why? Because they feel that they have been wronged by the state in the first place, and therefore, this system on their side of the house inherently leads to more crimes being committed in the first place, right? Then, panel, imagine if the law favored one group over another, where the police were seen as protectors only for certain communities, and this would clearly not be fair, right? Is it just for one person to be treated more harshly and less harshly based on their skin color or social standing? Our model will eliminate all of these inherent biases, and we on our side stand for a more equal and equitable society. Second argument about recidivism reduction. reduction then. Firstly, recidivism refers to the tendency of formerly incarcerated individuals to reoffend and return to the criminal justice system, right? So then high recidivism rates indicate that the current justice system is not rehabilitating offenders. Instead, often leads to a vicious cycle where individuals who are incarcerated become more likely to reoffend upon release, largely due to social rejection that they face after being labeled as criminals, right? So this system inherently fails to rehabilitate and reintegrate offenders into society, perpetuating the issue that leads to criminal behavior in the first place, right? So this looks like, for example, higher rates of incarceration on their side with the police, for example, racial profiling, etc., that we've already proven to you through our previous argument. And this increased rates of incarceration look like, for example, prisons perpetuating this environment wherein the narrative of the state wronging the criminal is further perpetuated. And secondly, there exists, for example, other external pressures upon prisoners in the current system. So this looks like, for example, drug cartels recruiting from prisons, and therefore leading to inherent tendency to commit more crimes after a person leaves the prison in the first place, right? So this is what exists on their side of the house, versus on our side, where we focus on rehabilitation and we focus on addressing the root causes of criminal behavior in the first place. We address all of these inequalities, and therefore we stand on our side. And therefore, I'd like to rest my case, standing clearly with the principle of equality and rehabilitation reduction on our side. Then.
Thank you so much, Speaker. Hello.
Hi, Navakan. He did a speech in for for governments to win this debate, they have to necessarily prove why any of the systemic biases in racism in terms of marginalization are largely arise because of police system. For them to say for some reason a world without the system will be much more equitable. Notice because on both sides why people marginalize other individuals, discriminate. Not necessarily because
Hello,
there is
Navaka.
police system, but rather yeah. Oh, okay.
You are sort of glitching. Like you're not glitching that much, but let's say your voice is cutting a lot in between.
Oh, yeah, I have some network issue. Wait, am I audible now? Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, now I can hear. Is it okay with everyone?
Yes, it was breaking earlier. Now it's better.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Lovely. You can restart.
If cut off in between. Yeah, sure. Restarting my speech in 3, 2, 1. For governments to win this debate, they have to necessarily make are of the police system state. It's not true because for the reason these reasons is just because are inferior. It's something that happens because of like just like people in differing ideologies or differing lifestyles and feeling that their lives is probably more superior. It probably happens because of like that certainly more of people from a certain community and another community, and then they can go ahead and marginalize other communities, right? So there are like much social reasons
Hello,
due to which
Navakan.
that these issues exist. I'm so sorry. I think
Can
let's
you
just
rejoin again?
tell me.
Happens. Okay.
I am so sorry. I hope I'll be audible now.
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay, yes. Starting my wait, restarting my speech for the last time in 3, 2, 1. For governments to win this debate, They have to necessarily prove why systemic issues like racism would not exist if there is no police system, right? Which their way to their alternative that they give is that for some reason there will be community groups which will be helping or which will ensure there is like restorative justice. I'm unsure what is this community, right? Because more often the reason why certain communities are marginalized is because they are few in number, which means if OG's alternative is this community group, is largely going to be like dominated by people from the majority community, which means that you will still have the same amount of like discrimination or same amount of like partiality towards like people from from marginalized communities, from like minority groups, which means you'll still have the same effect. They have to necessarily prove why there is another effective way and what necessarily makes them better than police system. What do we tell you? I think on opening up, we'll prove to you why at all points that these police systems are largely going to be countable, which means they won't be able to that even if they have the highest power to like go ahead and use like violence in legitimate and have legitimacy to do so, they still have limitations in the power that they go ahead and like use that violence. Second, you always have to like report to like people, right? How does that happen? Insofar as they have to like go, insofar the reason why people or like criminals fear police is because they're the only one who have the legitimate right to like carry guns or to use arms or to go ahead and like use violence in a legitimate manner. At that point, even if they do have that legitimacy, they still have to go ahead and submit reports, which means that this debate is largely happening in democratic countries, right? Because if it's happening in non-democratic countries, the alternative for police system is always going to be another oppressive force, probably army or probably another group which will have more amount of power over people, which means then there is just no debate there, right? This debate is going to happen in democracies where there is these limitations. At that point, what do we have? Sure, I think they have to go ahead and they're not necessarily going ahead and keeping or like punishing people, right? They are going ahead and accusing people, or they're going ahead and like letting the court go ahead and that and like just taking the people that they feel might have done the crimes and letting the court decide whether they are guilty or not, which means their role of police is not to go ahead and give punishment, but largely they're accountable to court system. Second, right, in the process of going ahead and executing the orders of court, that is to reduce crime or to go ahead and like make society better or try to go ahead and find people who are breaking laws, they are allowed some powers, but they always have to report whether they use it in the right way. Just why you have human rights group which can go ahead and submit like or can file cases against police system if they feel that they haven't used their power properly. That's why like custodial violence or like custodial killings are some things that are always brought up or are always filed as cases in courts. All these proves that it is harder for any policeman to go ahead and like use gun or to go ahead and like use violence in wrong ways, which means because it can affect their career, it will make them like suspended from job, or it will make them like it will stop them from and if they get proven guilty of not using power in the right way or they abuse power, then they might lose their job completely. Because of these reasons, there is always this higher restriction of going ahead and abusing the power. States that in most cases, people who are police will probably use these power in the right way or in the most urgent or in the most immediate way. Second, on like racial profiling, on their side, it's unclear why like you just because it's going to be community groups, you won't face any kind of issue. They have to weigh why the amount of harms that people face on their side is probably going to be lesser. But we'll take that trade-off, right? Sure, you might have community groups who'll probably try to like make them restorative. But what is the implication of it? Implication is the greater deterrence. They say that people will just there'll be higher recidivism risk, right? But notice, I think in and of itself, when you're probably sent to jail or you probably get caught by police, and when you have these higher deterrence, it makes it much more difficult for you to go back to crime because you don't want to go ahead and like waste another 7 years or another 6 years or like face the same amount of problems or same amount of like trauma that you had in a police station again, right? Because of these reasons, if police system is severe and efficient as OG claims, then it makes it difficult for people to get back into crime because they fear the consequences. All that proves that there is like high deterrence. The implication of this is that it becomes much more safer for people. It's safer for like people in general, right? People from minorities can also be in much more safer neighborhoods if it's difficult for criminals to go ahead and do crime, if they fear the consequences. The second reason why police system is better is because they can also go ahead and and make sure that you can just facilitate better public administration. It's easier to go ahead and conduct elections, or it's easier to go ahead and ensure policies or like public policies are done properly. You can always utilize police force to do like much more like positive things as well, right? At that point, it's just like good amount of workforce that you can use for public administration for like more amount of like benefits for people. Third is because it's just more accessible for people. Notice, right, in a world where you don't have like these kind of like police system, it's difficult for people to go ahead and like file cases. You have like much more helplines open where it's easier for women to go ahead and call if there is an issue and things like that. At that point, more police forces are trying to become as accessible for people as possible. Before that, any POI from closing government? Cool. Opening up. All right, no POIs. Great. All that proves is that because of these positive like ideas and because they are always accountable to the constitution and the laws that are made, they always have this higher obligation to go ahead and make it more accessible for people to go and access law and order. On their side, because you don't have police system, it becomes difficult for people to access court because it's largely because you need to have like higher amount of like ideas. It's much more easier to just tell a police person that you lost your purse or that has to be an FIR file because you can because like there's just a police station in every locality and it's much more easier to go and access rather than courts where it's difficult to find where you necessarily have to file cases. Because of these, it's just easier to go and bridge the gap that a normal person has in going ahead and fighting for their rights because they are able to like facilitate these gaps in and of itself. All that proves is that on our side, you're able to ensure that like more amount of people who do crimes are punished, because of which you have much more safer ideas. Second, they have to do just more amount of weighing to prove why racial profiling is exclusive on our side. Lastly, we just have more amount of like benefits for people. With that, very proud to propose.
Thank you, Allo DPM.
Can I just get 2 seconds to compile my notes?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, panel, firstly, I will be rebuilding my first speaker's arguments, then moving on to our third argument, and then finally moving on to some weighing and rebuttals. First of all, panel, the principle of equality still stands on our side because when Elo talks about how there's accountability on their side, which literally does not make sense because there's accountability only the authority is when the authorities are inherently unbiased, which they haven't proven as it is. And on our side, we're gonna have a community that is uh, that is less likely to be biased than the police. B, again, they talked about how they're going to be more effective and stuff like that. That's just not proven. And our argument about how there's going to be lesser recidivism on our side, that wasn't countered by the leader of opposition. So that just still stands, and we've proven to you as to why our principle of equality still stands. Panel, they talk about how the police is more accessible for people overall. Again, they haven't proven why is that why is it that there are millions of rape cases in India that literally are not reported. How is that even justified on their side, that people actually have access to help and have access to court? um they just haven't proven that. And a panel, moving on to a third argument now. there's inefficient use of state resources on their side, because the state has we can all agree that the state has a responsibility to allocate resources effectively and efficiently to maximize societal well-being. This includes investing in systems and institutions that provide the greatest public benefit while minimizing harm and waste. Why is this efficient resource allocation important? A foundational to government. Efficient resource allocation is a prerequisite for a functioning state. Misallocation erodes public trust, wastes taxpayers' money, and hinders societal progress. Imagine a school where most funds go towards unnecessary cameras while students lack teachers, textbooks, or basic supplies. That just does not make sense, right? That is the little scenario on their side. Now, panel, on our side, how is efficient resource allocation actually taking place? We eliminate centralized police systems. We redirect funds towards specialized services, like mental health teams, domestic violence responders, and social infrastructure, education, housing, healthcare, than actually spending on police that is again just not held accountable for their mistakes, for how biased they are. And even if we make a trade-off here, and we're being very generous over here, even if we do make a trade-off and we say that, even on our side there's very minimal form of bias, there's obviously lesser bias on our side, and then again we're just more efficient. We're using the state's resources properly. Accessibility is mutual, since if community programs exist, people will be able to easily speak up due to destigmatization towards victims of crimes. And above all, we have proven to you as to why there are inherently fewer crimes on our side which they haven't counted at all. Panel also, there are preventive measures on our side, as I've already proven that how there will be lesser crime on our side, such as restorative justice and community led initiatives address the root cause of crime, offering a better return on investment than punitive systems. It just does not make sense. They talk about how punishment makes sense, but again they haven't proven as to why punishing these criminals will actually stop the rate of crime. They again haven't proven as to why this punishment will actually reduce the amount of recidivism. Again, they haven't literally counted mass incarceration, which literally happens in the US till present date. They literally don't have any funds for their jail systems anymore because they've allocated so many resources to their jail systems, and their police is literally biased. They mass incarcerate like so many women, so many black people per day, that now they don't have space in their jails. Their police is literally biased. That literally exists in the status quo. So I again, we don't understand how they're literally countering that, and how this is just not working out. Also, um again, how do they violate efficient resource allocation? Panel understand the fact that if there's increased spending on police, if increased spending on police reduces crime, why do societies with the highest police funding still face significant crime rates, again like the US, right? If over policing creates harm, such as through systemic bias or escalation of minor conflicts, then the funding is actively over counterproductive. So that just does not make sense. Spending money on jail systems and police just does not make sense, right? Even if some police spending yields benefits, decentralization community models can achieve the same or better results at lower cost, proving police budgets are inefficient. Again, panel, if policing targets sorry, just one second. Panel understand the fact that every dollar spent on policing is a dollar not spent on more effective solutions like community services, restorative justice, or crisis specific interventions. Panel, they also talk about how they're going to roam around with guns, and that's literally, we don't want people to fear people for something that they haven't done. We don't want deterrence on our side. There will be inherently lesser crime on our side, because like people literally aren't being threatened that their life will be taken or something or the other will happen, right? Again, they're literally talking about how police can carry guns, and people will get scared and then they won't commit crimes. do you really want to do that? Do you really want your police to go up to people and then, just scare them for no good reason, for things that they haven't done? And they talked about how there's better public administration on their side. Again, in an economy like India, when they specifically talked about when they specifically talked about a democracy, just like India is one, they haven't proven how, they have a skilled workforce on their side. Because even the police system in India, when we talk about constables and people like those, they aren't actually very well educated. How is that better public administrations? And even if this does exist, it will require a lot of spending, which is just literally not possible for these countries. And we've literally proven to you as to why, there's so much opportunity cost involved with this. Are there any POIs?
Protected.
Okay. We would like to conclude our case.
Thank you, DPM DLO.
Just hi, now I can't hear him. Starting my speech in three, two, one. Uh, there are just lot of incentives for people to go ahead and commit crime, which means that it can like probably robbing a bank can make you rich in just like one day. Probably just like going ahead and doing more amount of like crimes or trying to steal more money can make you access more amount of luxuries in life. All that means that because of these higher incentives of reward that you can get by breaking social order is something that has to be countered with an equally powerful like incentive for them to not go ahead and commit crime. That is what like police system provides, right? Because notice the alternative that they give is that community groups or or something that can like help people to reform their like actions. But note, right, because for that to be effective, people have to opt in. That is, people have to feel that, oh, like I should change as a person and I should go ahead and take the most use of these community groups or make the most use of like any kind of like state support system. So all that means that the way that they can stop people from going and committing crimes is only when the people who want to commit crimes reform themselves or take this action towards themselves, right? For that to happen, either the people just have this like strong moral compass, or they have to necessarily go ahead and feel that there are consequences. The issue that people don't necessarily have the greatest moral compass is just because you live in capitalistic world. We see other people riding BMW cars that you feel like that you need to necessarily go ahead and like also like be equally rich, right? So that means that it's difficult for them to prove that all people will necessarily opt in, which means that for effectiveness to go ahead and happen in their alternative, they don't necessarily prove how people will necessarily go ahead and utilize it in the best possible way. What do we tell you? We tell people that there are consequences if you go ahead and do things that break the social order, which is punishment. Which and I think state system or like punishment system or prison system exists on both sides. It's where it's going to be much more easier to go and enforce these punishment on our side, because the role of police is to just go ahead and find people who are breaking social order. The deterrence is much more higher, right? Because it's not just the fact that, oh, if I get caught, I'll go ahead and be ending up ending up 10 years in jail. It's also the fact that that it's much more easier to get caught because there is one police every night patrolling every road or like every street and things like that, which means it's difficult for people to go and have these or like act on these incentives of going and committing a crime. All that means it's that on our side, because you're able to like tell people there are consequences, it's much more easier to go ahead and stop crimes. But second, on the idea of like racial profiling, I'm unsure why it's all like why the because police will go ahead and always like go ahead and like try to just like bring in like the all racial minorities or all like vulnerable groups and then send them, right? Because there always exists code, because police are not the one who can decide who is guilty or not. It's the court who decides. Sure, even if you have bad police, then if they bring in people or if they go and like arrest people on racism, then there is code that decides and you have objective metrics, which means because of this check, if probably a police goes ahead and accuses a person just because that person is from a different race, then the court can just see that, oh, they did not commit that crime, which means that is just like then it's just a bad record for that police, that they're not able to like convert the cases or they're not doing a good job. This is the remarks that you get. All that means it's difficult for them to, I don't know, get promotion, for them to like go ahead and get like better career, or for them to like get a raise and things like that. So that means there are always these incentives to do your job in the best possible way. Sure, there might be cases of racial profiling, but for that to reflect in like the society, or for that to reflect in consequences, they have to necessarily prove why also like judicial system is also like goes ahead and punishes people on racial profiling. But if they do that, then I think then there is this symmetric on the amount of people who are like were sent into prison because of like racial profiling, right? Second reason is that you just have like more amount of like checks and mechanism. They don't necessarily prove how you can do like positive outcomes, right? Because notice, if crimes happen, you need people to feel comfortable, or you need people to feel that they can access justice, right? It's much more easier where you see like where you see like police stations in each areas in like in your own area, which you can go ahead and access. But second, with more amount of like technologies, it become like the amount of like state systems are trying to reform, or they try to make it more accessible, which means it's much more easier to go ahead and file an FIR from your home itself. You have like online reporting system, or you have like helpline numbers if women are feeling uncomfortable at night time and like things like that, so that you can like go ahead and access state services much more easily. Which means that on our side, because of these like technological advancements, you try to make it more accessible. On their side, even if you have community group, the issue is it's not proven to be effective. It's not proven to be something that can help people who are at distress, or which can give them to or make them feel that there is someone who can protect them, right? Because they have to prove the opt-in or on like closing bench to say why it's always going to be effective, or always there's going to be trust in them. On our side, because I think OG agrees that they are going to be much more like police will be trying to like go ahead and like arrest more number of people. You feel trust, you feel that they can go ahead and protect us in these distress time, which means the people who are the most vulnerable, who are probably suffering, are able to access it much more better on our side, because it's like because of technological advancement, and also you just have trust in them. Any PI from closing government?
Okay, I'm
Okay,
really
yeah.
confused. Why can't we have helplines from within the community? Why do we need a police helpline? Why can't there be volunteers who opt for all the things that you mentioned? Why does it have to be the police?
It's just power, right? On our side, you know that a policeman with a gun would be there, or you'll know that there's someone who'll come and report you, or will probably try to like ensure there's someone. On your side, the person who's in that community group won't be carrying that same amount of power. This is literally what separates police system from any other. The legitimacy to just use violence, right? All that means, because you know that you can have access to a greater power which can help you which can support you when you are in the highest distress, it becomes much more easier for people to have trust in state system, that they like that the system itself is for them, is for them, and helps them to like go ahead and have a better life. All this proves is that on their side, even if you can access, you can't get benefits, which means it's again difficult for people to opt in, especially the people who you want to go ahead and change. Or in the end, I think for to have a safer neighborhood, or for to have a safer society, you need people to fear the consequences of going ahead and committing crimes, which happens on our side. Second, you can make administration much more easier. Police can help in conducting elections and stuff. Lastly, it's just like people can just access more amount of power on our side to make them feel protected. Very proud to propose.
Great. Thank you, Diallo. I have just for the sake, I have opened beginner BP practice room in the breakout room. So whenever kids are here, I'll just send them to beginner BP practice room. Meanwhile, member of Gov.
Hi, can I be seen and heard?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take opening opposition since they took one from us.
Just 1 second, Abhavir. There are kids coming for beginner BP session. I'm just gonna send them to the next breakout room.
No worries.
Hi, Ariana. How are you? Can you go to the breakout room which says beginner BP practice?
Sure.
Okay, see you. Yep, Abhavir, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Uh, 3 lines of extension. First, on why communities can be peaceful on our side of the house without institutionalized police. Second, why community-driven policing actually spends more time on things that are more important, things like rehabilitation and actual things that do not cause recidivism. What opening government tries to claim will make it out. And thirdly, on why it is principally unjust for the state to have so much power in terms of having monopoly over using force. But before that, just extraneous rebuttal to opening opposition's case. Opening opposition's case is just really bizarre on the idea that police gives you so many benefits insofar as most people are just for some reason motivated to do crimes and stuff like that. I would just say that you can't rob a bank on either side of the house because there are security guards on either side of the house. It's unclear why you would be able to do that. All the other benefits that they try to claim and notice how they respond to our POI. Their POI response is that police has more power, and that is the kind of deterrence. We would posit that communities also have similar incentives to vest power to some people, the people who would be patrolling the streets or the people who would be engaging with the community within these community policing. Even though it is a more decentralized way of power, it's unclear why these people would have the same amount of social standing as any other ordinary citizen. That would render the whole process unusual. I think opening opposition was super uncharitable in this debate, but we're going to take them at their best, and we're going to run 3 independent arguments, something that I flagged within my own speech. First, why is community has the capacity to be more peaceful in the absence, even in the absence of an institutionalized police? First mechanism for this directly clashes with opening opposition, which is just saying that most people are peaceful and most people are good people and wouldn't want to be in the bad books of the society or the law. The reason for this is first, the sheer humanity that we have. More likely, what you just would say is the biological reason to not fuck up or to not go against the social order, because humans have a tendency to collaborate, and because it helps them to survive much better. Because if you're not collaborating with the general mass, it's unclear why you would be able to have the capacity to survive. So meaning that most people generally just have a biological instinct to not go on a killing spree and just kill more and more people. And the shared humanity that we have, we think opening opposition doesn't recognize that. But the second thing I want to explain here is just the inculcation of morality, right? Because most people here in status quo would generally know that it's immoral to steal. Most people would generally know that it's immoral to kill other people. So opening opposition's claim here is that, oh, if you are seeing more benefits, most probably you will take those decisions and you would discard that morality. Two responses. The first response is that it's unclear to what extent this happens, because we would say that point out to examples in status quo where even though a lot of people right now still do have opportunities to rob banks, do bad stuff, they still don't do that because they think that it's immoral or their religion forbids them to do all of these things. But more importantly, I would just say that insofar as the stuff that opening opposition talks about of things like things that go beyond these inculcation of morality, things that are things like murdering people at the spur of the moment, those are beyond the scope of this debate, because on either side of the house, it's unclear how police is able to to stop all of these crimes. Just pointing out to status quo, we think crimes still happen in status quo. It is not clear how police is helping in status quo insofar as there are hundreds of thousands of crimes happening right now, because these things are out of the ambit of this debate. The second thing, this explains why on our side of the house as well, crimes are going to be significantly lesser. The second thing I want to explain is on trust and engagement. Not because there is more access, because the people are from your own community, and people are no, and these people are people you see when you see their own daily life, and people who have been raised with you, and things like you have more proximity with these people. We think there is just inherent trust with these people. Opening government mentions that, but don't really explain the comparative. I want to explain and be very explicit about what the comparative is, because not all opening opposition and op bench in general, the kind of people who would be holding a gun in their hand and roaming and patrolling your streets would be people who would most likely not be of your own community, but even if they are from your own community, these people are people who have extreme views on crime. The reason why most people join police, despite it having so many less leaves, so less, very less social perks and salary, and not join and leave things like investment banking and join policing is not because they get fun out of that. There are two broad reasons why they do this. The first reason is that just generally they like the profession where, or they have violent tendencies, or they like more power within them, which means that it is inherently bad for these people to come into power and have so much power for them to go ahead and influence exert so much power at such a large scale. But secondly, and more importantly, these people, even if they don't just generally are power hungry, these people have extreme views on crime. These people are people who want to exterminate crime from its own roots, and most likely these are the people who take the harshest of the measures and the toughest of the measures, and draw a gun the moment they see the moment they find even the slightest of any problem happening. Opening opposition tries to run that there are incentives and trainings that can be done, but the problem here is not about incentive, but about the capacity of these policemen and the way that they have been raised so far within their own lives. It's unclear why this training is in and of itself effective, but even if it is effective, we don't think people can inherently go ahead and overcome their racial biases and stuff like that. This is the first claim about why communities can be more peaceful. Secondly, on why community-driven policing leads to more rehabs. The only reason for this is that you have more proximity, and because these people are from your own community, we think you have more you have access to more context specific issues, things like, or things which are often ignored within status quo, because everybody points out to high crime rates within African American communities, but nobody points out to the correlation of that to the socioeconomic backgrounds and the problems that they face, because they are because they have been historically disenfranchised. These are things that are left out of popular general discourse on opposition's bench, because most of the taxpayers think that the money that they have spent should go only and only to eradicate crime from its roots, and most people are desensitized to the lived experiences of the specific communities that are marred with crime on either side of the house. Note that this is important because this leads to more and more rehabilitative and policies that actually target these and remove these crime from their roots in more rehabilitative purposes and more engaging purposes, as opposed to just pushing for harder sentences, something which is the comparative on opposition. Lastly, on the principle, on either side of the house, police system might not be the best. We still see crimes in status quo. Opening opposition and closing opposition will have to defend that. Note, in the absence of any certainty of whether you can prevent crime to their fullest, we think the most important thing within this debate is to give the communities or the people the right to determine to what extent they want to, from where they want to be, they want to be governed, and where they want their force to be exerted. For all those reasons.
Great. Thank you, MG.
Hi, am I clearly audible?
Yes.
Aditya here, I'm going as MO. POI is anytime, anyhow. Starting in 3, 2, 1. just one extension and closing operation, that why police system is much more effective in solving crimes than any of the counter community leaders or like decentralized form of policing, which is being presented as a counterfactual and at opening government and closing government. The simple delta on both the sides is that on their side, the people who are governing or who are like policing are people from within the community, volunteers, vigilantes, whatever. On our side, they are the centralized police system governed by certain rules and regulations by the central government. The centralization is the key thing which we will prove why it will lead to reduction in crime across areas and across like larger communities in general. The first thing to note here is that because we have centralized police system, which means that we can have uniform sets and regulations and rules and procedures as well as training equipments, etc., all across the country, sharing of information, sharing of people. On their side, the burden is much more heavy because we will prove that even if one community becomes lax in policing their own area, that harms every other community around them, because crime is not localized. Crime often ends up being like a very complex phenomena where there are organized crime lords working across borders and across countries and like cities. But there are also many underground networks where you have people from within multiple communities who are like maybe peddling drugs, or who are going ahead and like having a information system where they tell you about the possible places where you can commit crime and stuff like that. Which means crime is a very complex phenomena, and this is something which they never engage in, because their best case is that you have a vigilance system, you have a helpline to your community leader, and you can raise a issue in your panchayat and that will be solved. Problem is, what is the capacity of panchayat to solve such a complex phenomena is something which OG never proven, but I hope OPWIP does that, because in their absence, they just lose that crime cannot be stopped on their side. So, four reasons why a centralized police system is good. The first thing I want to note is that when we don't have a fragmentation system on our side of the house, we have more information sharing across borders. Which means, let's say a person in Bihar is going ahead and like coordinating a crime in Maharashtra, then Maharashtra police and Bihar police can coordinate with each other and share whatever information they have on that particular crime in order to solve it at a much faster and rapider pace. The second mechanism to do is to do prove this is that we have better allocation of human resources, which means that if let's say Jharkhand, because of Naxalites, is a more high crime area, then seeing that the central government can go ahead and allocate reserve police forces in other areas to Jharkhand or to maybe Jammu and Kashmir when terrorist activities increase in this particular area, which means that you can flexibly like shift people from one area to another wherever there is a high crime associated in that area. They do not get privilege because on their side of the house, the people who are volunteering have to be from that same community. I really don't know what incentive does a child or does a youth in Jammu and Kashmir have to start volunteer and put his life in danger whenever there is an increasing militancy activities in that particular area, which means they have immense human resource problem where they don't get volunteers or vigilantes at the time or at the area of crime at the in the numbers which it is required to do so. The third mechanism to prove why we are more effective is just economies of scale. Money is not unlimited, which means if you have to train and give guns and give technology and give information sharing and all of those like spy devices popularized by Bollywood and Hollywood to every person within your police community, it's impossible for them to do so on their side, because every community works in a fragmented way and a decentralized way, which means they distrust other communities, and they also have they are like self-serving in nature, they are self-sufficient in nature. So it's really unclear on their side how they get the benefits of just ordering en masse, ordering like bodyguards, like the uh, gun protection, bulletproof suits, or better guns, or just better technology, or have better training, which we can do because we can do it en masse. The fourth mechanism to prove why we are more effective is that we simply have more people opting into. And the reason for this is very simple. On their side, there's like literally no incentive for you to be a volunteer, for you to give up your job, for you to stop working for 9 to 5 in a capitalist world where you are competing with every other, because on their side every person is also lazy. I agree with Abhay, every person is good, but the problem is that every person is also lazy, which means that people generally do not want to go ahead and put their life on risk, even when there is high crime area, unless it affects them directly. Which means if inequalities exist on both sides, and like OG's principle equality falls because equality is not a product of policing, as Namakan also proves. Equality is a product of people, some people having probably natural talent, probably accident of birth, they were born in a wealthier family, they were probably in a geographical location which has much more trade and resources than others who are born in a desert or stuff like that. Maybe inequalities fundamentally occur due to multiple numerous factors, so they exist probably on both sides of the house. On their side, then the richer people have ability to protect themselves by hiring bodyguards, by probably having better houses, better like protected houses, fences around their house and stuff like that, which means they are less affected by crime, which means they also have
Yeah.
less incentives to go ahead and send their people outside and join police or join these volunteer vigilante forces to fight crime. On their side, the problem, or on our side, you have a police system which means on their side, the people who are forced to do these vigilante activities are also the people from these marginalized communities themselves. So you are putting a double burden on them. First, you're committing crime against them, and then you're asking them to go ahead and help themselves by nominating one of them as the leader to go ahead and fight against this. We think this is principally unjust. So, but just by just having more opt-in into police forces, because we give them salary, we give them more protection, because you can probably like protect yourself against the criminal drug lords because they have better efficiency, better training, better guns, better weapons, etc. But also we have more social esteem protected away, more esteem, more like a sense of honor, and that is why more people just join into police force in the first place. For all of those reasons, we are sufficiently able to prove that a centralized police system is much more effective in solving crimes than a decentralized system. Why is this the most important impact in this debate? Because of two reasons. One, notice like happening of crime is the worst possible thing to happen to any particular human life and dignity because of everything which OG themselves say. So whenever a crime happens against you, you lose your probably you lose your loved ones, you lose your ability to earn for your loved ones if there's a thievery or if there's a robbery, which means you lose your ability to live a dignified life. A. But also B, the second massive harm is that you lose trust in the state, which means there's a lot like there's a breaking of social contract, which means you are unable to go ahead and live in a peaceful, stable society, which leads to all kinds of massive harms on scale and on like principle. The conclusion of all of this is very simple. By just being more effective, we solve more crimes. And that's much more important, and that's the fundamental idea of having a like police system in the first place. For all of these reasons, weighing on accountability and separation and counterfactual on whip, proud to oppose.
Thank you, Amo. Gavit.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Cool. POI is after the 5th minute. I'll take from OO. If not, then CO. Uh, Starting my speech on the reverse count of 3, 2, and 1. Panel firstly taking out the clash between which is either community is more likely to reform or either police structures are more likely to reform. We believe, I think there are 4 reasons as to why communities are more likely to reform in a greater propensity. Firstly, is I think so communities want to retain people within themselves, which means you need wider cultural engagement, you need wider social engagement within communities, and you need wider economic engagement, which means you want people to start businesses within your own communities, etc., which means you want to retain people within your own communities as opposed to letting them exit, which means if you as a community is not able to provide the best sort of security, people are likely to leave, which means you as communities are likely to invest within huge amounts of security and would likely to make police the best way possible within your communities in and of itself, which means communities want people to retain, and they also care about the security of the people because because of the reason that if my community is unsafe, it is also unsafe for me. Which means at any point in time, my family and my children would also face the same proximate risk. Which means, as community leaders, if I am not investing in making the community a best place possible for everybody, and I'm allowing organized criminals or mafia, my children and my wife is also unsafe, which means I have direct proximate incentives to make communities the best place possible for everyone. Secondly, I think so there is huge amounts of segregations that has already happened within current political scenarios, because certain political parties just win in certain political areas, which means people just tend to, like, Republicans move to Republican areas and Democrats move to Democrat areas. But secondly, you like to live around people who are like you, which means segregation is a norm that has happened in democracies anyways, which means when communities are making their police structures, these are the communities who are more monolithic and who are comprised of more homogeneous people, which means it is very likely that black people are being policed by black personnel in our comparative in of itself, as opposed to white people from California state or Texas going ahead and policing in New York, etc., which is like then you have more propensity for these racial violence and racial biases and racial profiling at the very first place. The third comparative is simple: whatever is the best way to solve crime can be adopted by a community, which means my first speaker explains why rehabilitation is something that these communities are likely to adopt. But ignore that. Even if deterrence is the best way, I think communities have effective mechanisms to adopt deterrence as a mechanism to solve crime, because they want to protect themselves, which means it is very unclear as to why police structures is a higher deterrence over community. And like communities can also like punish you greater way, or can have more volunteers, etc. In terms, if they want to increase the amount of deterrence, the delta becomes that we are more rehabilitative because we have greater trust, and trust is the precursor to any sort of rehabilitation, because if I don't trust police structures, I'm not likely to opt into them anyways. I think so the fourth thing is that these communities have greater amounts of legitimacy, because these are the proximate people whom you trust, whom you engage with on Sunday mornings, etc. Which means also it is a prefers motion, which means I am socialized into an environment where these community volunteers and these people who are hired by these communities on contracts, etc., are somebody who gain legitimacy of power, which means O is not comparative when they say that these community volunteers cannot get legitimacy, because I'm socialized into a world where these people are being seen as the people who have power, and hence I give them legitimacy myself. I think so. Fifthly, is that these police personnel are more accountable to these communities on the comparative. Firstly, because my job directly depends upon the behavior I show to these community people, which means if I don't show good behavior to these community people, my job can be taken away. On the comparative, I am not directly accountable to these community. I think so. Secondly, is that there are societal narratives that society forms, religious narratives that, oh, you need to be good police personnel, you derive better karma from that. I think so. Thirdly, is that there is huge amounts of social ostracization if you become a bad police personnel for the community and you don't solve crime and you're sleeping on your own duty, which means this social ostracization is a biological tendency that I want to avoid at all points in time, which means I'm likely to be a good police personnel. But fourthly, I want to be seen good in front of the eyes of my children and my family, and I'm doing duty in front of them all the time because I'm in that community, which means I have that positive incentive. Then, on the comparative, why police structures are very difficult to reform. I think so. Three reasons. Firstly, there are huge amounts of police unions which are having huge amounts of influence within these organized police structures, which means it is very, very difficult for people to either hold cases against these police structures or either go ahead, which means they have huge amounts of resource pooling and have collective ability to hire lawyers, etc., within these legal justice systems. But secondly, I think so. It is they lobby to not get their police personnel fired, which means it is very difficult to fire a corrupt police personnel because they are our police unions which are supporting them symmetrically because they have collaborative incentives. I think so. Secondly, is that there are specific legal mechanisms that protect these police personnel, which means you have like cool down period to like collect your stories together, etc., which only exclusive rights to police personnel. You also have multiple saving rights or like qualified protection which these police personnel gets, which means they have huge amounts of legal protection. I think so. Then there is huge amounts of pro cop sentiment, like in countries like America or India, where some police are seen as protecting these majority communities at the trade off of minorities, or being harsh on crime is seen as cool, which means at any point in time it is very, very difficult to reform these. But before that, a PIO. No POI. I think so. This means that you are very. It is very difficult for you to like reform these police. This is even further exaggerated when you have lack of media control and you have less call out capacity to these police personnel. I think so. Then some simple weighing. I think so. These communities have collaborative incentives because they want to. They realize that organized crime is a security threat to them, which means they have collaborative incentives and they can still share information, technology, and personnel with themselves. Secondly, it is very uncertain as to why multiple states are collaborating on the side of CO, because then it is very uncertain why Maharashtra police is ready to collaborate with Gujarat police in terms of when Godhra riots happened. Maharashtra did not send its police personnel when Modi as a CM demanded them to, which means at any point in time it is very uncertain as to why on their side multiple departments are likely to collaborate with themselves, because there are huge amounts of internal division, huge amounts of internal politics that also goes on like within these states and political parties. I think so. Thirdly, rich people are symmetrically going to be protected because they anyways have more amount of money on either sides, which means it is not the point. I think so. The weighing on our side is because you trust the communities more, you're more likely to report, and that is precursor to any solvency of crime or criminal justice debate. With this, super proud.
Thank you, Gavir.
Still audible?
Yes.
Cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Weighing against CG first. So CG's case is that communities are homogenized, which further proves my case of effectiveness, because if communities are homogenized on their side, which means all black people are living together and they are being policed by a black person, then it means that the interaction between different communities is even less reduced, which means their collaboration incentives is even less reduced, which means every harm which they say to our case, which is like there are internal politics or state departments probably not collaborate, that's fringe cases that may or may not happen. But on their case, it certainly happens because every community is self-sufficient and does not depend on others to, or does not trust others to be more rational or to be fair whenever they share resources. But the second thing they say is that communities have incentives to invest in security, and lastly capacity. So on incentives, why do we still win? Because the only incentive they have is things like businesses or people will move away from your community if it's a high crime area. The problem is that these incentives are not enough for individual humans to put their life at risk, particularly those who have the ability to protect themselves at the cost of other communities. And that is my analysis on how rich people behave is crucial, which CG never understood or responded. Because my analysis is that rich people have money and ability to protect themselves, and that is why they won't have any incentives to actively participate in this vigilante or volunteer force and put their life at risk, but also be a fund toward or give funding towards this community. So like just take this intuition. Why will I hire a bodyguard for the entire apartment if I can hire the same bodyguard for my own apartment at lesser cost? This is the mindset which people largely have on their side of the house, and this leads to ghettoization of people, where the rich and prosperous communities have no crime because that's because they only invest resources and only have police or community leaders for their own particular personal domains, whereas large number of areas are just left unattended and are left at the mercy of socio-economically disadvantaged groups who even if they have capacity to protect incentive to protect themselves, they do not find the capacity to go ahead and risk their lives, but it comes at the cost of staying away from their daily wage job. But also secondly, they don't have enough money or technology or resources to fight the crimes which are very dynamic and which have ways to like stop from being caught at all points in time. So CG never proves why crimes are solved. That's why they lose. But then their case is that communities are peaceful. I've already broken it that there are inequalities between rich and poor within communities, so they are probably not peaceful. But also within like across communities, between black communities and white communities, there is very too much distrust and less of interaction. That is why there's even more racial or ethnic or community-wise violence probably happening on their side of the house. But lastly, then, what's the biggest problem at CG and OG as well? The biggest problem in the counterfactual is the volunteers, the kind of volunteers which they will have, will now get undue influence. And this is what happened in, like, say, say middle India or somewhere before that, before Britishers introduced police system in our country. So the police system hasn't been forever. We have a real life comparative to compare their case to, or to like analyze their case to. So before police system was nationalized and introduced in India by Britishers, what used to happen is that the lawmakers or the monarchs had their own personal bodyguard acting as police forces. This is the kind of comparative they are much more likely to have. And this is problematic because of multiple reasons. One, it leads to complete lack of separation of power between legislators and the police, which means that might is right is kind of propagated on their side. Whoever has more guns, whoever has more power, gets the ability to enforce their laws or regulations or wishes on the other communities and on the entire people. This leads to more instances of violence, but also more casualties in the conflict, but also as like as bystanders, some people lose their property, life, etc. This is the kind of comparative they had to defend when the police, the person who is the strongest becomes the volunteer. Because they are the only volunteer, they get undue influence, and because they have undue influence, they have complete control and complete power in their own community, where they can go ahead and oppress others as much and as long as they want. But because they never proved a community system works in a good way, Abhay just flags it in members where a community can act peacefully. His only make for this is that people are good. If people are good, then probably police people on our side are also good, which means they don't have incentives to go ahead and like harm minorities or just kill random black people simply because of every mech which Abhay himself gives, which is like you get social oppression, you get you have biological instinct or biological aversion to take others' lives. So all of this is still true on our side, which means police people can also be good people and not always be assholes. But lastly, so that is OCG is out. OG. So OG has three main claims. The first claim is opportunity cost. We put a lot of money into this. We can probably use this money for welfare programs. There are two missing burdens here. The first missing burden is that why does this money, when used in welfare programs, trickle down to the most vulnerable people? Because I can posit red tape is exists, corruption exists. Probably the money is not utilized by the most vulnerable people. Like in prehistoric India or in medieval India, the money was stuck in the hands of zamindars and like landlords and did not actually reach the landless laborers. This kind of system is propagated on their side of the house. But also, secondly, they never proved by that even if this money reaches to the poorest people, why will this money be used in the best possible way? Because I, as a poor people, can probably use this money just for gambling or for alcohol or for cigarette, for escapism, and not really use this money in the most efficient and effective way. That is why opportunity cost as an argument does not work in this debate. The second push from them is that rehabilitation doesn't work. I don't think we have rehabilitation is a argument which they can weigh against my case of recidivism or like deterrence. So my case is that you are more effective, which means you catch more criminals. So in their best possible case, if even if the person whom the police catches comes out of the jail and is like angry at the state, that does not lead to any harm or ultimate final conclusion, because you cannot present your anger against the state, because the police system is so effective that you will be again caught, and now this time you will be sentenced for a much longer period, which means recidivism again does not work, because like you cannot act on your anger because the police system is much more effective. But the last thing they say is minorities are oppressed on accountability. I'll just give you more responses and like responsive weighing, and this will also take out opening objection because these responses are better. Five responses. One, you can have body cams on these police officers and literally record what they are doing, so they can't do police brutality. Second, there's an internal affairs department in every police industry, which is whose entire work is to take into account what police officers are doing and have internal checks and balances. Third, independent news media exists. Fourth, transfers happen, which means you can't stay in one area for a longer time. So you don't have ability to make connections and be corrupt because you are transferred from one place to another. And lastly, confidential informant or whistleblowers exist, which can tell about you if you go ahead and become corrupt or commit a crime. For all of those reasons, we are proud to oppose.
Thank you for this debate. Just give me 5 minutes, I'll be back ASAP. Or maybe 3 minutes. Thank you so much for this debate. This was wonderful. I hope, like Janvi, Shan, you were able to learn something. I just want to say something. Since we are having advanced BP sessions till 8th, is it possible Kinshuk, Abhavir, Aditya, or maybe Vishesh to be available tomorrow as well? Same time.
I am available, Vishesh.
Very good.
हम बता देंगे मैं I think अभी तो I'm available for now. I'll confirm आज रात तक.
Okay, no problem. Great. Okay, I'm ready with my oral. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Great. I have just two observations in the debate. The first is proving the extent of efficacy of the counterfactual. This looks like if community driven patrolling is quite effective, how effective will it be? Which means some more believable analysis. However, this observation doesn't hinder the judgment that I have of the debate. The second is, I think in closing, there is a lot of clash what the perception of people looks like. I think CG posits that people inherently don't want to commit crime because there's always a moral deterrence that you have, and I think CO concedes to this. But I feel like one, if maybe if people already have a checks and balance system within their morality, I don't think so they would be needing a lot of external checks and balances, which means the efficacy of community driven projects like slightly go down. Again, this observation doesn't hinder of the judgment that I have within the debate as well. These are more like auxiliary observations, which might like affect the debate in, let's say, closer rounds. The judgment is as follows: the ranking. Closing op takes a first, closing gov takes a second, opening op takes a third, and unfortunately, opening gov takes a fourth. I want to compare opening gov with opening op. Opening gov has three larger ideas. The first is the reason why they prefer to live in a world where police systems are not there is because police systems are inherently one, they have incentives to be extremely bad because they have hurt the marginalized sections in the past as well. This looks like extreme amount of racial profiling, disproportionate amount of discrimination, and let's say people or specifically like community members not feeling safe under the radar that police systems operate on. The second idea that opening government has is recidivism rates, which means even if you have a strong deterrence, you still have higher number of reoffenders occurring even if you have that kind of deterrence in the status quo, which means the police systems are being ineffective. That's the logical conclusion that opening gov arises on. The last is analysis on why their counterfactual, which is community driven patrolling, will be more effective. These are three larger ideas. I want to compare it with opening op. Opening op's first claim is most of these systemic bias don't only align with the police systems, which means even without the police systems, there are other people who have been harassing these communities. So I think the first way in which opening op hits opening government is the uniqueness of that oppression and how does it not relate to police governments, police institutions. The second analysis, which sort of covers up what opening gov has been saying, is opening op proves why most of the police professionals or personals are the most effective and the strongest deterrence in the absence of something which is as weak as a community driven project. So I want to, let's say, weigh both the analysis on racial profiling, recidivism rates, and community projects with the capacity analysis that opening op does. The second analysis that opening op has towards opening gov is why most of the power that police personnel have are legitimate to use violence in extreme situations, because I think most of these personals are already trained in a specific manner, and most of the power, let's say custodial violence, can only be brought in courts as well, which means even if police personals are legitimate actors, they're also the most trained, but you also have external checks and balances on the police personals to never hold them in a negative right as well, which means the second analysis that opening up has towards to prove this capacity is most of these personals can fear the consequences of the way they are committing a specific action towards a marginalized group as well, which means no police professional will ever harm another marginalized section without fearing the consequences of, let's say, getting investigated, or let's say having other person attack you on the same basis as well, which means there are harder gun laws which exist in a different kind of country, which means a police personnel already knows when to use a gun and when not to use, which means they are probably the most legitimate actors to never harm a marginalized section. I think the volume of analysis sort of deals with opening government's argument on racial profiling, because the alternative that opening government says is I think significantly weaker in the debate, because I think opening government has to prove the efficacy of community driven projects. Why is this the most effective narrative, and why these people within the community driven let's say patrolling have higher capacity to let's say not have systemic issues against the marginalized groups, which means there has to be a lot of characterization on why these community projects become effective in the very first place, and why they are better from the police systems that opening opposition already has a volume of analysis to prove. This is the deadlock breaker on opening. I think which side proves the capacity more effective, and which let's say personnel is more effective to deal with the consequences that marginalized people already face within the status quo. This is what I have on opening clash. Let me just compare opening op with closing gov, or closing gov to opening op, because I think this is the closest clash in my mind as well. I think opening op has a simplistic analysis to prove that most of the police professionals will be accountable. However, there's a lot of speculation on opening up as well, whether these people will be accountable, and this speculation sort of gets hinted in opening gov as well. If these people are continuously like harming the marginalized groups, which means the efficacy of police people are significantly lower in the current status quo. Where does closing government uniquely enter within the debate? The first thing they're able to prove is the way in which these police professionals operate is inherently more violent, which means even if you train them, even if you give them like significant amount of power, it's principally incorrect to give them so much power within the status quo, because oftentimes like the way police people utilize this power to, let's say, curb the violence that marginalized people have been facing towards them as community people are significantly more difficult or like more harmful, which means the power utilization that these police officers do, even if it's legitimate, really grants more power to the police people to use it in an extremely bad manner. Which means what closing gov does is they agree that the power that exists within the police professionals are fine, but the way this power gets utilized on closing government is significantly more harmful. So I think opening up should have done a lot more prediction to prove why these police professionals in all circumstances will use this power in the correct manner, as opposed to hurting the people on like circumstantial basis, which is why I think you had BLM movement, etc. To begin with. The second thing that uniquely, let's say, positions closing government in the debate is why community project, or let's say why community patrolling indeed has more like rehabilitation incentives in the status quo. Other things with closing government says like becomes a wash in this debate because it's quite symmetric. I think there's a lot of analysis on member of government, like why people can be more peaceful, why there's shared humanity, and why there's an inherent biological things to never fuck up, etc. I think all of these things are also symmetric on either side. I don't think so this, let's say, specific biological analysis changes the tipping point of the debate. If closing government would have done more analysis on maybe like fixated into some ideas, it could have become a tipping point. However, this is like inbuilt molarity is something that never changes within the debate as well. What is the second analysis that closing gov uniquely positions them into? It's the idea on why community patrolling is inherently more rehabilitative and the approach is much more peaceful. This is a direct clash with opening op, because opening op says that the capacity that community patrolling has is not that great, which means it's significantly weaker. What closing gov uniquely positions them into is, one, I think rehabilitation is much more important than just using punitive measures, because punitive measures might be effective, might not be effective. But closing government, like let's say analyzes why rehabilitative policies are important for people who have been committing violent, who have been having violent tendencies for a long period of time, which means a society which has more rehabilitative approach and which has more community building is much more stronger and has more in-group tendencies, as opposed to really have police control everything, which means I think O has to prove why this, let's say, capacity or legitimacy given to people in general is going to be significantly better. These are the two ways in which I clash this with opening opposition. I want to compare closing gov with closing op, then the analysis on closing gov and opening op also becomes a lot more clear. I think one thing that I was independently able to evaluate on closing gov, which is a much more weaker stance, and which is where I think CO sort of chips in as well. What member of government says is this community project, or this community, why am I saying community project? Community patrolling is significantly peaceful. But then GovWhip says that community patrolling can also be deterrent enough. So there's a lot of tension between whether this community patrolling is peaceful or whether this community patrolling can also be violent. Because for community patrolling to be a stronger deterrent, they have to use mechanisms of violence in situations which are out of their control. If this is true, the extent of these community patrolling being peaceful is significantly lower, which means I think closing gov has to do a lot of work to like prove the consistency of what these community patrolling will do. And even if like universal situations or let's say extreme situations occur in which they are required, what is the stance or what is the effort that these community patrolling projects are sort of like using to curb these kind of exigencies which occur within the community as well. This is where I think closing opposition uniquely chips in as well. They have like three ideas. The first is most of the police systems are centralized, which means they have a centralized approach of how they want to use a specific amount of resource and how they want to curb, let's say, the violence that has far-reaching consequences and it's not located within one demography. I think CG's counterfactual is effective in one demography, but for a crime, so what closing government's characterization is that most of the violent tendencies have far-reaching consequences, which means if one person is probably peddling drugs in one community, you're likely to have like more far-reaching impact for drug peddling across the city or state as well, because you can have like export-import of drugs regardless, which means I think closing government's impact is significantly concentrated within one demography. What closing government says is police is more, it has a more effective tool to curb violence in multiple demographics because they are much more trained and are probably have informants across multiple demography as opposed to situating it in one demography regardless. The second idea that closing op has is most of these let's say police personals have multiple areas of coordination, which means they are much more flexible in terms of curbing the crime that exists within the status quo. This is a direct clash with the capacity that community patrolling projects have. The first rebuttal that closing op does and that significantly weakens the counterfactual is most of these community projects will never be sustainable on closing gov. So I think closing gov has to prove the sustainability of their counterfactual, whether they are going to be flexible in the longer way or whether they will actually have lenient methods to curb the violence that exist within one demography. So that's like one rebuttal that sort of clashes with the idea that closing gov is saying. The second idea is on economics of sale, which means most of the community patrolling is more resource intensive, and most of the state doesn't have that kind of money to allocate it in a significantly lower demography, as opposed to giving it to the police who are far like more trained and they are specialized in their arena, which means you probably like you increase the economics of scale and you do not become a burden on the government to constantly give you resources when you don't have it in the current status quo. The third idea is why I think and this is like an extension that this is more like a horizontal extension that they derive out opening op, because opening op is very linear in terms of telling what police systems can do, which means they have enough capacity. What I think closing op says is just they increase the let's say extent of professionalization that most of the police systems have. There are three ways in which they extend on this. The first is I think most of these police personals will be transferred to different cities if they lose control. Second is I think most of these police professionals are probably enforcing law and regulation themselves, which means they're the most important people to enforce that law and regulation. The third thing that they are able to ensure is but these people have multiple external checks and balances, and this is where there's a short differentiation And this short differentiation also sort of makes O and CO a little bit closer on this clash on capacity for professionals, on police personals. What O says is maybe they are accountable, but what CO says is you can have whistleblowers, you can have like confidential informants who might just check up on police professionals, and they might get investigated for the kind of investigation they are doing within the police systems as well. So I think O is unclear on capacity, but CO is more clear on who actually lends that capacity in the very first place. And this also makes like the capacity argument more clear on closing up as well, because I think closing up has to chip in and maybe make this system more sustainable on their side. Great. This is what my analysis for everything looks like. Ma'am, can I leave because I have a different class right now? Okay. Yes, you can come tomorrow. I can give you like more feedback on what it was for OG. Are there any more questions? I sort of like missed CO and OG, but I'm happy to do it when Ishan and Janvi are there tomorrow as well. Are there any questions?
None from my side.
None
Okay.
from CEO, thank you.
Okay. Kinshuk, Abhevi, do you have a question?
No questions. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
for the OA. Just feedback if possible.
Yep, that's the second question.
No, I said thank you so much for the OA. It's just feedback that we want.
Oh, okay. I think just like maybe so everything was, so I just have two observations on closing gov for this room specifically. I think one is just I mean a member of government spends a little bit time on proving that community can be peaceful, but I think for proving this, I think the legwork that you do is significantly weak, because I think you assert that most people are peaceful. However, this is not true. So the reason why people commit crime is is because they are inherently violent, or maybe they've had situations in their family, or they might be just like looking for maintaining their livelihoods as well. So maybe like when you assert that most people are going to be peaceful, you just have to do a lot of legwork to prove why this inbuilt morality is so universal that people stop doing crime anyway. So if this is true, that also makes your counterfactual very weak, because then I think you can have community patrolling, you can maybe like have police systems as well, so that that decreases the delta altogether. This is the first observation. Maybe if this analysis wouldn't have been there, you can also choose alternatives to prove that community can be more peaceful, because they don't have weapons, etc. They don't have infirmary, etc. The second is, I think this is more like a inconsistency that I was able to witness, because what Abhavi says is that most community, let's say, driven ideas are peaceful, but what Kinshuk says is it is a strong deterrent. And if it's a deterrent, which means like the direct, as an average intelligent voter, I'll be like, okay, they can be violent as well. So maybe choose one. If they are peaceful, why they can be a strong deterrent? If they're a strong deterrent, can they be peaceful? So it's just like a idea that you have to choose and maybe run it consistently. That's all.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Could you also drop speaks, if possible?
I haven't taken speaks, honestly, but let me just drop it. I'm happy to drop the speaks. OG. Oh. CG. CO. Yeah, this is what I have. Thank you for coming. This really helps.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the